October 24th, 2001. It started like any other day in the quiet town of Conroe, Texas. But before the sun would set, it would become one of the most shocking crimes in the state's history. 19-year-old Michael James Perry, a troubled teenager battling drugs, crime and desperation, made one final, deadly choice. A decision that would lead to the brutal murder of 3 innocent people and send him straight to Texas death row. In this story, we uncover how greed turned to violence, how a robbery went horribly wrong, and how a single night of madness destroyed multiple lives. You'll see how investigators pieced together the gruesome puzzle, the trial that sealed his fate, and the heartbreaking twist, just hours before his execution, when Perry learned his own father had died, and finally, we reveal what he requested for his last meal and the haunting final words he spoke before the lethal injection. This is the chilling story of Michael James Perry, one of the youngest inmates ever executed on Texas death row. Michael James Perry was born on April 9, 1982, in Houston, Texas, the second of 3 children. His early years were marked by instability. His parents' turbulent relationship ended in separation, leaving Michael and his siblings to navigate a childhood shadowed by uncertainty. While his mother tried to maintain some structure, the chaos of their home life left lasting impressions on young Michael. As a child, Michael was bright and curious, often described as charming and energetic. Teachers and neighbors recalled a boy who had potential, a boy who could be funny and thoughtful. But beneath that exterior, Michael carried feelings of neglect, loneliness, and frustration. These early emotional wounds would shape the decisions he made as a teenager. By his early teens, Michael began to rebel against authority. He struggled academically, often skipping school and spending time with older peers who introduced him to drugs and petty crime. By 15, his experimentation with substances like marijuana and alcohol had become a coping mechanism for the pain and confusion he felt at home. His mother tried to intervene, but the grip of peer influence and addiction pulled him further away from guidance. At 16, Michael had already been arrested multiple times for minor thefts and offenses. He began drifting between homes and friends, searching for acceptance in places that would ultimately harm him. These early experiences planted the seeds for the tragic path that lay ahead, a path that would lead to violence, loss, and ultimately death row. Michael James Perry's early life was a portrait of potential marred by circumstance, the first chapter of a story that would soon take a devastating turn. As Michael James Perry entered his late teens, his life continued to spiral out of control. It was during this turbulent time that he met Jason Aaron Burkett, a young man whose recklessness matched Perry's own. Their friendship quickly became inseparable, fueled by shared mischief, drugs, and a growing disregard for rules. Together they were a dangerous combination, one impulsive, the other daring, both blinded by desperation and poor choices. Perry and Burkett spent their days drifting through neighborhoods, seeking easy money, stolen items, and thrills to escape the emptiness of their lives. Their petty crimes escalated in both frequency and severity, a reflection of their growing audacity and lack of guidance. While Perry had once shown glimpses of a sensitive, thoughtful side, that part of him was fading under the influence of addiction and peer pressure. By October 2001, the duo's plans had turned darker. They began targeting homes, not just for theft, but with an increasing potential for violence. Conversations between the two hinted at their willingness to cross lines that neither might have dared alone. The bond between them, once rooted in companionship, had morphed into a dangerous partnership, each feeding off the other's recklessness. It was this partnership that would lead them to the Statler household in Conroe, Texas. A seemingly ordinary house full of unsuspecting lives would become the stage for a crime that shocked the state. The friendship that had begun as a source of thrill and escape had now transformed into a deadly alliance, one that would leave 3 people dead and 2 young men facing the harshest consequences imaginable. The foundation of tragedy was laid. 2 lost youths bound by loyalty, drugs, and desperation, heading toward a collision with fate. The morning of October 24, 2001, began like any other in Conroe, Texas. Birds chirped, neighbors went about their routines, and the Stotler household was filled with ordinary peaceful activity. But for Michael James Perry and Jason Aaron Burkett, it was the culmination of weeks of restless planning, petty crimes, and escalating recklessness. In the days leading up to that fateful morning, Perry and Burkett had been drifting through the streets, looking for quick cash and stolen items. Their bond, forged in addiction and desperation, had evolved into a dangerous alliance, one that fed on each other's audacity. Perry, troubled and impulsive, admired the Conroe parked at Sandra Stotler's house, a symbol of wealth he could briefly possess. Conversations between the two hinted at the lengths they were willing to go, their moral lines blurred by drugs, fear, and ambition. As they approached the Stotler home, the quiet suburban streets seemed almost mocking in their normalcy. Perry felt a mix of adrenaline, fear, and numbness, a cocktail that would push him toward irreversible action. For a brief moment he hesitated, perhaps remembering glimpses of his childhood innocence or the warnings of friends, but the moment passed. When Sandra Stotler, 50, opened her door, she saw a familiar face, Perry, someone she trusted. That trust would cost her life. In a flash, the shotgun Perry carried was raised, and the first shot echoed through the house. The terror didn't end there. Moments later, her son Adam Stotler, 17, and his friend Jeremy Richardson, 18, were shot near a local lake, silencing 3 lives in one day. The murders shocked the community. A quiet town, a seemingly ordinary day, had been shattered by 2 young men whose choices were fueled by desperation, recklessness, and moral blindness. The aftermath of the murders left Conroe, Texas, in shock. Neighbors were terrified, and the local police knew they had a race against time. The victims, Sandra Stotler, Adam Stotler, and Jeremy Richardson, had been killed in cold blood, and the perpetrators were still at large. Driving a stolen vehicle through the quiet streets, detectives quickly pieced together evidence from the crime scenes. Witnesses described a familiar car, the Stotler's Conroe, seen speeding away, and surveillance tips narrowed down the suspects. Investigators focused on Michael James Perry and Jason Aaron Burkett, both young men with prior arrests and histories of petty theft. Their reputation for reckless behavior made them prime suspects, but the brutality of this crime was on another level. By October 26, 2001, only 2 days after the murders, law enforcement closed in. Perry and Burkett were found driving the stolen Conroe, unaware that their capture was imminent. When confronted, the teens initially denied involvement, but mounting forensic evidence and witness testimony left little room for doubt. The stolen car, the shotgun, and fingerprints all pointed to their guilt. The arrest shocked the community. These were not hardened criminals, but 2 teenagers whose reckless choices had spiraled into horrific violence. Perry, just 19, now faced the reality of the Texas justice system's harshest penalties, and Burkett, slightly older, would also be held accountable. The hunt that began in a quiet Texas town ended with handcuffs, and a courtroom journey that would ultimately lead Perry to death row. What began as a series of desperate acts of theft had transformed into a story of triple murder, national attention, and irreversible consequences. After their arrest, Michael James Perry and Jason Aaron Burkett faced the full weight of the Texas justice system. The charges were severe: capital murder, armed robbery, and multiple counts of homicide. The case drew national attention, not only because of the brutality of the crimes, but also because of the youth of the perpetrators. The prosecution presented a meticulous timeline of the murders. Witnesses recounted seeing Perry and Burkett fleeing in the stolen Conroe, while forensic evidence tied Perry directly to the shotgun used to kill Sandra Stotler, her son Adam, and Jeremy Richardson. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate and cold-blooded nature of the crimes, painting a portrait of 2 young men who had crossed the ultimate moral line. The defense argued for mitigation, highlighting Perry's troubled upbringing, a childhood marked by instability, parental separation, drug use, and early brushes with the law. They sought to show that Perry's poor choices were a product of circumstance and immaturity, rather than innate malice. Despite this, the jury was confronted with the overwhelming evidence and the emotional testimony of grieving families. Family members of the victims described the devastating loss, detailing the impact of the murders on their lives and community. Their words left a lasting impression on the courtroom, emphasizing the irreversibility of Perry's actions. Ultimately, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Michael James Perry was sentenced to death, while Burkett, who had cooperated at times during the investigation, received life imprisonment without parole. For Perry, the sentence marked the beginning of a long, isolating journey toward death row, where years of reflection, appeals, and remorse awaited him. The trial closed, but the story of tragedy, poor choices, and irreversible consequences was far from over. For Michael James Perry, life after sentencing became a stark, isolating reality. At just 19 years old, he was thrust into the confines of Texas death row, a world of strict routines, concrete walls, and relentless reflection. Each day was punctuated by the harsh reality that his life had been reduced to counting hours, waiting for the inevitable. Perry's time in prison was marked by solitude and reflection. Away from the chaos of his past, he confronted the consequences of his choices. Letters to his family became one of his few connections to the outside world, an attempt to reconcile with loved ones while coping with overwhelming guilt. Prison staff and fellow inmates occasionally observed his quiet demeanor, a blend of remorse, contemplation, and the numbness that comes with living under a death sentence. The years also involved legal battles. Perry filed multiple appeals in hopes of overturning or commuting his sentence, though each effort was met with the immovable weight of justice. His lawyers highlighted his troubled upbringing, immaturity, and substance abuse issues, arguing that he had been shaped by circumstance as much as by choice. However, the gravity of the murders left little room for leniency. Daily routines of death row, meals, limited exercise, and restricted interactions forced Perry into introspection. He pondered the lives he had taken and the irreversible path he had chosen. Each passing day brought him closer to the lethal injection that awaited, and with it, a sense of finality he could neither escape nor delay. Life on death row was not merely punishment. It was a crucible that revealed the tragic combination of lost potential, poor choices, and the harsh consequences of violent crime. For Perry, each moment was a reminder of the life that might have been and the lives that could never be restored. As July 1, 2010 approached, Michael James Perry faced the final hours of his short, tragic life. At just 28, he sat in the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, staring down the reality of death. Before his execution, Perry was granted one final request: his last meal. He chose 3 bacon, egg, and cheese omelets, 3 chicken cheese enchiladas, and 3 cans each of Pepsi, Coke, and Dr. Pepper, a strange comfort for a man about to meet his fate. In those quiet hours before his death, prison officials informed Perry that his adoptive father had died just a few weeks earlier. In June 2010, the news broke him. His father had been one of the few people who still wrote to him and prayed for him from the outside. Perry reportedly wept, then prayed silently, realizing he would never see him again, at least not in this life. When the time came, Perry was led into the execution chamber. Witnesses say he appeared calm, almost resigned. Looking toward the viewing room, he spoke his final words: "I want everyone involved in this atrocity to know that they are all forgiven by me. Mom, I love you. I'm ready to go, Warden. Coming home, Dad. Coming home." At 6:51 p.m., after receiving the lethal injection, Michael James Perry was pronounced dead. His final meal, his father's death, and his haunting last words now serve as a chilling reminder of how a life filled with potential can descend into darkness, and how even at the end remorse often comes too late. As we close the chapter on the tragic story of Michael James Perry, we are left with a haunting reminder of how a life filled with potential can spiral into darkness. From a troubled childhood to a deadly friendship, poor choices, and the devastating murders that shook a community, Perry's story is one of consequences that cannot be undone. His time on death row and final hours reflect the weight of actions taken and the irreversible nature of violence. It's a sobering look at how decisions, however small at first, can escalate into tragedies that forever change lives, including one's own. While his life ended in the ultimate punishment, the memories of the victims and the impact on the families remain. Their stories deserve to be remembered, and the lessons from this tragedy are clear. Choices matter, and the path we take can define the rest of our lives. If you found this story gripping and want to explore more true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe to our channel Criminal Profiles. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a chilling story, an investigative deep dive, or a tale that reveals the complexities of justice, morality, and human nature. Remember, the truth behind every crime is more than just headlines. It's a journey into the human experience, and here you'll witness it all. Subscribe now, and join us as we uncover the stories that demand to be told.